All right. So I don't really like sit start uh conversations, especially week one, because like you should have paid for a guy, and that's the guy that you paid for. So that's the guy who should be in your lineup. So if you have seven slots, positional slots, uh your seventh round pick should be in your lineup this week. Put your money where your mouth is. There's a few exceptions that we're going to talk about today. Hopefully, so you we can understand what my theory is behind like how to do sit starts as the season goes on. As your capital has less value because we know what the past was, and that's the best indicator of the future. We're trying to predict future outcomes based off of what has already occurred. And this is a new season, so a lot of last year doesn't matter, but some of it does. So anyway, I was talking to my co-manager in our high stakes league about why we're going to play Godwin at flex, and that's because even though the Bucks project as one of the worst offenses in football because of their offensive line and Baker Mayfield, uh, the Vikings are coming off being the worst defense in football. So if Chris Godwin can't do it this week, he's unusable probably the rest of the year. So hopefully he does it this week and then we can sell high. But that's the thought process behind it. Now, the other guy, Jordan Addison, it's equally interesting. Now, I don't think very many people should have been buying Jordan Addison in premium draft positions. The draft ranking being equal to a round that would go into your lineup immediately. He probably should have been slightly outside that, but if you're in certain 3 wide receiver leagues or something like that, he might be in your lineup this week. No harm, no foul to that. I do think he has like wide receiver 2 upside. This is maybe not the week to find that out. So the idea would be you want 2 good offenses going up against 2 bad defenses. So the pace of play is higher. The offenses have to take more chances to put up more yards and points because they're trying to keep up with each other because neither team's defense can stop each other. That would be the best case scenario. So the Bucks and the Vikings are probably like the worst case scenario because you have what projects to be a good offense going against a good defense and a bad offense going up against a bad defense. And if you try and predict that, you're not going to be able to figure it out. Again, this is fantasy football. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Everybody's guessing, and everybody's trying to be right so they can come back and tell you that they knew better. No one knows. We're just guessing. So in this case with Addison, we're not entirely sure if he's going to be the wide receiver 3 in the offense, if he's going to be the wide receiver 2 in the offense, if he's going to be the number 2 target or the number 3's target. And this is against a good Bucks defense that can grind the game down and really put pressure on the Vikings offense to just not make mistakes, not necessarily score points, but to just not make mistakes and prolong the game into the fourth quarter where hopefully the ball will bounce a particular way and the Bucks can get out with a victory. That's how the game theory behind how the game has to function for the Buccaneers to pull out a victory. So if I have Addison and he's not in a premium slot, I'm probably not playing him because I want to know the information in for the future about how the Vikings are going to utilize Jordan Addison. The problem with that is I may end up losing out on a usable week because I'm waiting for information, as opposed to Chris Godwin, where you want to be on the other side of that indicator, where you want to get you would rather have him be out of your lineup the week before he blows up in your face. You want to get, if he's on your bench where he has that one last good game, that's fine. You just don't want him in your lineup where he has that first bad game, because that might cost you a loss in the same way that Jordan Addison might cost you a loss if you start him not knowing the information. So anyways, the same thing as like, playing Sky Moore to try and get those targets from Kelsey. And we saw how that went because it was very difficult to predict how bad the Chiefs were going to play as an offense. Some of it was there. We knew there were going to be 2 new offensive tackles. They didn't play particularly good. They didn't play particularly bad. There was a lot of other stuff going on with the Chiefs. But the thought process of saying, hey, Sky Moore getting the targets vacated by Kelsey's injury, that's a good thought process to play. Like, I'm okay with my team that I played Sky Moore on saying that was the process. The thought process was sound. The me being able to predict how bad the Chiefs offense was going to play was not sound. Let's see. If you're wondering about Chris Godwin for the future, because this is big trade bait. I want him to play good 1 week, and then I want to trade him. If you're wondering about Godwin versus Evans, Evans said he's not going to sign a extension with the Bucks or vice versa. Godwin's under contract next year. Evans isn't. So if there's a guy that's going to get moved before the trading deadline this year, it's Evans. And Godwin's more than likely to be there, especially if the Bucks are going to tank for Drake May or Caleb Williams, because they probably want a good receiver to develop their quarterback with. They don't want to be like the Carolina Panthers and trade their number one receiver, so their quarterback has no one to throw the football to. So if you're wondering about projections, what projections are they're just over underlines for what a player is. So if a player has a 10-point projection, it's basically thinking he's more, or there's a 50-50 chance he's going to go over or under the projection. So don't worry about projections. They don't really mean anything. You should be setting your lineup based off of basically what your gut feeling is. And your gut feeling should basically be good offenses against bad defenses. Even if the game isn't necessarily projected to have a lot of points in it, the idea is a good player on a good offense will score his points, and he won't need the fourth quarter. And we see this with Devonta Smith last year, who had like no fourth quarter usage because the Eagles were winning. I think that was one of the stats that blew my mind, is that the Eagles had won so many games that they just weren't throwing in the second half. So like Devonta Smith was putting up all his points in the first half because a good offense will score points. Let's see. I talked about all this. I have my notes. I'm just reading my notes if you're wondering. And if one of the other things about sit start is if you don't know how a guy projects, don't play him. Like, we should know what a guy is supposed to be. If we know what a guy is supposed to be, then that tells me where I should be playing them. So the other question about all this stuff, as we just kind of peruse through some of the rankings this week, is if you're wondering about Waller and you're going to wait till kickoff tomorrow night to figure it out, like Daniel Bellinger is the backup tight end. He was pretty good last year. He's almost draft usable. For the Giants, he's a guy you could pick up. And then the other guy in that game, because I believe it's the Dallas game, is Ferguson for Dallas. And those guys should be late starts, so you could be able to do that. So the guys that I have been talking about are Devin Achane. I'm not using him. I want to stash him to see what his role could be. That is a very good matchup for the Dolphins. So if I was in a pinch, I could play Achane. Same thing with Dalton Kincaid. I want to see how that works itself out. So I'm stashing him for another week, even though I do think if you drafted him in a premium spot, you could roll Kincaid out there, be relatively confident in it. If you're going to roll Kincaid in a flex spot, I think you could still expect wide receiver 3 outcome. If you're in a position where you don't know, you should be waiting a week. I think Puka in deeper leagues is a definite start. With Cooper Kupp going on the IR, those targets have to go someplace. It's the same thought process as Sky Moore. Those targets have to go someplace. If you're not sure, wait another week. If you're streaming quarterbacks, I think Sam Howell is a start this week against a bad defense. For the most part, everybody else, it should be where your draft position or your capital that you spent on them tells you to run the guy. And if you're still not sure, just think about like, what is the option for the offense that you're using? The further down as an option you go, the less likely you should be wanting to play that guy, even if they're in a good offense. And if they're in a bad offense, then you should also be running that guy down the list. And then obviously, if the last straw that you want to be looking at, the last string to pull, is if they're playing a bad defense. And again, looking for two good offenses playing two bad defenses, most points being scored that week. So those are the criteria that you should be running through your head. So if you look at the Eagles, for instance, going in this year, the number one option on the Eagles is Jalen Hurts, right? And then everything else is a pecking order beneath that. So the Eagles are either going to throw the ball with Jalen Hurts or they're going to run the ball with Jalen Hurts. That's the pecking order. And then probably the number two pecking order is going to be Jalen Hurts throws football to A.J. Brown. And then the next one is going to be Jalen Hurts throws football to Devontae Smith. And as we work down that list, we're going to get to the point where we have two variables, which is pretty much DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. And we don't know where those guys go into this pecking order, and I highly doubt they'll ever be anything higher than like beneath Jalen Hurts throws football to Devontae Smith. And that's if Smith stays the number 3 option in that offense. And Dallas Goedert would probably be like the number 4 option after give ball to Jalen Smith. So like when we break it down, like, the sit start behind all this, it should be, what is my team's option? So another good example, and we look at wide receiver projections this week. Another good example would be DeAndre Hopkins with Tennessee. Probably not going to be a particularly good offense. It doesn't mean they're going to be bad. I don't know where DeAndre Hopkins is going to lie in that pecking order. He could even be the wide receiver 3 in that pecking order after, or the third receiving option after Chig and Burks. But he's always going to be beneath Derrick Henry. So when I look at DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going like, well, DeAndre Hopkins to me will never be more than maybe, a less than a lackluster wide receiver 2 or a flex. Burks and Chig will never really be appealing guys. Chig would have to get up to about like 8 targets a game for me to really like him. So like I'm always going to be looking for other guys to be putting in those slots. And like, since I don't know where DeAndre Hopkins is going to fall, but I know he's going to be further down the line, he's always a guy that I would be looking to sit over someone else that has that advantageous. They're the number 1 in a good offense playing a bad defense. That's kind of the thought process that you should be having every week. I would just say, like, pundits, like, the people on the internet that think that they know fantasy football, you should be making your own decision. I would advise I make my own decision about how I want to lose my games. That you can run that thought process through your head, and you don't need someone else to validate you. So anyway, I think that's about all I got for today. Maybe I'll do something tomorrow.